Professor Krelth had been teaching advanced xenobiology for 73 cycles, and in all that time, he had never encountered a student quite like Mira Voss. She sat in the back row of the lecture hall, arms crossed, staring out the viewport while he explained the complex respiratory systems of carbon-based life forms. Every other student, all 12 tentacles, pseudopods, or whatever appendages they possessed, were frantically scribbling notes. Krelth prided himself on his challenging curriculum. His exams were legendary across 3-star systems for their difficulty. But this human, this infuriating creature with her 2 arms and absurd bipedal stance, she looked like she was contemplating what to have for lunch. Miss Voss. Krelth's voice boomed through the chamber, his vocal sacs inflating to twice their normal size. Perhaps you would care to explain why you feel my lecture on methane-breathing species is beneath your attention? Several students gasped. One of the Kiksari delegates actually fainted, their gelatinous form puddling onto the floor. Mira turned her head slowly, those unsettling forward-facing predator eyes locking on a Krelth with the kind of calm that made his scales itch. She smiled, and that was somehow worse. "Oh, I'm listening, Professor," she said, her tone dripping with honey and hidden knives. "You were just explaining how Vortaxian lung structures can't process oxygen above 0.03% concentration. Fascinating stuff. Really?" Krelth's eye stalks quivered. "Then why, pray tell, are you not taking notes like your peers?" "Because I wrote my term paper on Vortaxian biology last month." She leaned back in her chair, balancing it on 2 legs in a way that defied several laws of physics Krelth had spent decades teaching. "Submitted it 2 weeks ago, actually. You haven't graded it yet." The silence in the lecture hall could have suffocated a vacuum-adapted life form. Krelth's breathing slits flared. "That paper isn't due for another 3 weeks." "I know." Mira examined her fingernails, those bizarre keratin growths humans insisted on decorating. "I got bored." "You got bored." Krelth repeated the words slowly, tasting them like they were toxic. "So you completed an assignment that requires 6 weeks of intensive research, 3 laboratory sessions, and peer review in what? Your spare time?" "Well, yeah." She shrugged, a peculiarly human gesture that somehow conveyed indifference and superiority simultaneously. "The research station I interned at last summer had a Vortaxian crew. Nice folks once you get past the whole methane-breathing thing. They let me study their medical records, atmospheric requirements, the works. Figured I'd put that data to use." Krelth felt his temperature regulation system failing. This was impossible. Humans had only been part of the Galactic Academic Consortium for 5 cycles. They were supposed to be struggling with basic concepts, not casually mentioning research internships with species that most students only encountered in textbooks. "If you have already completed the work," Krelth said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "then perhaps you would like to share your findings with class? Since you clearly have nothing better to do than stare out windows and waste everyone's time." "Sure thing, Prof." Mira stood, and Krelth immediately regretted his challenge. She walked to the front of the class with the kind of confidence that suggested she had done this before, probably while juggling flaming objects or wrestling apex predators or whatever insane activities humans engaged in for recreation. She tapped the holographic display, and her paper materialized in the air, 53 pages of dense analysis, complete with 3-dimensional molecular models, statistical breakdowns, and Krelth's breathing slits nearly sealed shut. Original research data. "So, here's the thing about Vortaxian respiratory systems," Mira began, her voice shifting into presentation mode. "Everyone focuses on the methane part, right? Big deal, they breathe methane. But what's really interesting is how their cellular mitochondria, or the equivalent structures, have evolved to prevent oxidative damage in mixed atmospheres." She pulled up a diagram that Krelth himself had planned to show in 3 weeks. "See, most academics assume Vortaxians die instantly in oxygen-rich environments. They don't. They have about 4.7 minutes before cellular breakdown begins. I tested this." "You tested this?" Krelth's voice emerged as barely a croak. How exactly did you test lethal atmospheric exposure on a protected species? Mira's grin could have sold dubious investment opportunities to a Ferengi. Simulations, Professor. Very detailed simulations based on tissue samples I collected during my internship. All completely ethical and approved by the Interspecies Research Board. I have the documentation if you want to see it. She didn't wait for his response. The data kept flowing, each point more sophisticated than the last, each conclusion backed by evidence that would make a senior researcher weep with envy. Krelth watched his carefully planned semester crumble into dust. This human, this impossible creature who looked like she had wandered into his classroom by accident, had just delivered a graduate-level presentation on material he hadn't even covered yet. The other students were staring at Mira like she had sprouted an extra head, which, given some of their species, was actually possible and considerably less shocking than what they were witnessing. Furthermore, Mira continued, warming to her topic, the traditional models for Vortaxian population sustainability are completely wrong. The carrying capacity calculations don't account for their unique reproductive cycle, which I observed firsthand during the breeding season at the research station. You observed Vortaxian breeding behaviors? One of the Kiksari students had revived enough to ask the question everyone was thinking. Those ceremonies are sacred, closed to outsiders. Yeah, well, apparently saving the station commander's offspring from an airlock malfunction earns you honorary family status. Mira waved dismissively. Who knew? Krelth's world had officially stopped making sense. Professor Krelth had experienced many emotions during his 73 cycles of teaching, but the mixture of rage, awe, and existential dread currently coursing through his circulatory system was entirely new. Mira Voss had been talking for 20 minutes straight, and somehow, impossibly, she had not repeated a single point. Her presentation flowed like a perfectly engineered thesis defense, complete with counterarguments to positions that Krelth himself held and had planned to teach next month. Any questions? Mira asked, turning to face the stunned classroom with the casual confidence of someone who had just explained how to make toast, not revolutionized 3 decades of xenobiological research. A brave Threxian student, whose name Krelth could not currently remember because his brain had short-circuited, raised one of its 6 appendages. How did you get funding for tissue sample analysis? The equipment required costs more than most student scholarships. Oh, I built my own scanner, Mira said, like she was discussing furniture assembly. Took about 2 weeks. Used parts from the engineering department's recycling bins and some stuff I ordered from a salvage yard on Station 42. Works almost as well as the commercial models. Plus, it has this neat feature where it can analyze samples in real time instead of needing those annoying processing delays. Krelth made a sound that his species typically reserved for imminent predator attacks. You built, he managed to wheeze, a tissue analysis scanner. From garbage. Recycled components, Mira corrected primly. Sustainability is important, Professor. Thought you'd appreciate that, given your whole lecture last week about resource management in closed ecosystems. She had been listening to that lecture too. Of course she had. Probably while simultaneously solving complex equations in her head and planning her eventual conquest of the known galaxy. Another student, a Pelvorian named Jex, spoke up with the kind of trembling voice usually associated with religious experiences. Did you really save a Vortaxian child from an airlock malfunction? Mira's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in her armor of casual superiority. The airlock's safety sensors failed during a pressure test. The kid, about 6 cycles old in human years, got trapped in the transition chamber. By the time anyone noticed, there was maybe 90 seconds before the outer door cycled open to vacuum. But Vortaxian biology requires methane atmosphere, Krelth heard himself say, his academic brain engaging despite his complete mental breakdown. You cannot survive in methane without a full environmental suit. Correct, Mira agreed. Which is why I grabbed an emergency respirator, dumped the oxygen cartridge, and filled it with methane from the near storage tank. Improvised a seal, went in, grabbed the kid, got out. Took about 45 seconds total. The hard part was explaining to medical why I smelled like a swamp for 3 days afterward. Methane really clings to human hair. The lecture hall had gone so quiet that Krelth could hear his own circulatory system pumping. "You could have died," he said, and was surprised to find genuine concern in his voice. Methane exposure, equipment failure, decompression, any number of factors could have killed you. Mira shrugged again, that infuriating gesture. "Yeah, but they didn't. The kid lived, I got some cool scars and a cultural education, everyone wins. Plus, the station commander's family taught me their traditional cooking methods, which was awesome because Vortaxian cuisine is criminally underrated in galactic food circles. Of course you learned to cook methane-based food," Krelth muttered. "Why would you not learn to cook methane-based food? It is actually pretty straightforward once you understand the chemical reactions," Mira said, completely missing his sarcasm or, more likely, ignoring it entirely. "I've been thinking about writing a cookbook. Actually, cross-species fusion cuisine. Could be fun." Krelth wanted to retire. Immediately. He wanted to return to his home world, submerge himself in the breeding pools, and never think about education again. "Miss Voss," he said, summoning every remaining shred of professorial dignity, "your paper is clearly of exceptional quality. However, this does not excuse you from attending lectures and participating like every other student." "Sure it does," Mira countered, and Krelth felt his eye stalks twitch. Section 17, paragraph 4 of the Academic Consortium Guideline states that students who demonstrate advanced proficiency in course material may petition for independent study credit. I filed that petition this morning. It is probably in your inbox right now. Krelth checked his communication device with one appendage while trying to maintain eye contact, which was difficult because humans only had 2 eyes and he had 7, creating an inherently unbalanced dynamic. The petition was indeed there, filed at 0600 station time, complete with supporting documentation, 3 letters of recommendation for researchers he respected, and a proposed independent study plan that would make most doctoral candidates weep. This is acceptable work, he admitted grudgingly, which in his culture was equivalent to enthusiastic praise. "But if I approve this, what exactly will you do with your time? Build a faster-than-light drive from spare parts? Accidentally solve the unified field theory while doing your laundry?" Mira laughed, and it sounded genuine, not mocking. "Actually, I was hoping to audit your advanced temporal mechanics course next semester. I have some theories about causality loops that I want to test, and you are literally the only professor in 3 sectors who might understand what I'm talking about. That course is restricted to postgraduate students only." "I know. I filed a petition for that too. Should be in your inbox under the first one." "It was." "Of course it was." Krelth looked at Mira Voss, this impossible human who had waltzed into his classroom and casually demolished every preconception he had held about Earth species, and made a decision that he would either celebrate or regret for the rest of his natural life. "Very well. Your petition is approved. Now please, for the sake of my circulatory system, leave my classroom and go terrify someone else." Mira gathered her things, grinned at the shell-shocked students, and headed for the door. Just before leaving, she turned back. "Thanks, Professor. This was fun. See you next semester." As the door closed behind her, one of the Kiksari students spoke into the silence. "Did that really just happen?" Krelth collapsed into his teaching platform, all 7 eyes closed in defeat. "I have absolutely no idea. Someone please tell me what I am supposed to teach now for the next 3 weeks." Nobody had an answer. Somewhere in the station corridors, Mira Voss was already planning her next impossible achievement, and the galaxy would simply have to deal with it. So what did you think? Did this story surprise you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this sci-fi story, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more mind-blowing science fiction stories every week. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.